Last week, I began reading The Prisoner of War, and I'm going to continue this week in Chapter 1 again of Lieutenant A.C. Roach's his account, first-hand account of the true horrors that he went through in a prison camp during the Civil War. The account was published in 1865, and so shortly after the war ended. So we're going to begin with arrival at and departure from Tuscumbia, or Tuscumbia, Tuscumbia, Tuscumbia. All right, anyways, we left Eastport on the afternoon of the 21st of April and reached General Dodge's headquarters the following morning at 8 o'clock. We then proceeded in rear of General Dodge's forces, who were continually skirmishing with the enemy as they advanced as far as Tuscumbia, Alabama, scouring the country to the river on the left and to the mountains on our right, and collected in all the horses and mules that could be found. And we arrived at Tuscumbia about 5 o'clock p.m. on the 24th day of April. Here, General Dodge furnished us with about 200 mules and 6 wagons, the latter to haul our ammunition and rations. We now had all but about 150 of our men mounted, though some of them very indifferently. At 1 o'clock on the morning of the 26th, our brigade moved quietly out of the camp at this place, taking a southeast course in the direction of Rome, Georgia. General Dodge at the same time advanced with his forces on Cortland to engage the enemy until we should be beyond pursuit. Had he followed this program, which was in fact the object of his movement from Corinth, as Colonel Strait expected, and as he assured the colonel he would do, nothing could have interfered to prevent the expedition being entirely successful in every single particular. The first night after leaving Tuscumbia, our advance, consisting of all our mounted force, camped in the vicinity of Mount Hope, a village in Lawrence County, Alabama, having made a march on 34 miles over mountainous and almost impassable roads. Colonel Strait took up his quarters at the house of one of the most wealthy and influential citizens of the place, and withal an errant trader, though his daughter, a highly educated and accomplished young lady, professed to sympathize with us and our cause, and did everything in her power for our comfort. In fact, her actions went so far to prove her professions of loyalty that Colonel Strait ordered the quartermaster to pay her for a beautiful riding pony taken by one of our 4 tired and sore-footed boys, it being General Rosecrans' orders to pay all loyal citizens for whatever property was taken and for the benefit of the command. The following evening we entered the village of Moulton, the county seat of Lawrence County, Alabama. Our advance, consisting of Captain Smith's 2 companies of cavalry, charged into the town about sunset, putting to flight and capturing part of a company of Colonel Roddy's command. Loyal citizens. In the county jail at the above place had been confined for longer or shorter periods at different times those citizens of the county who, amid the stirring and exciting scenes of a gigantic civil war and surrounded by armed traitors, still defended the old flag and battled manfully for the glorious principles of constitutional liberty. We need some of those around today. Many of these patriotic but persecuted men were previous to war, friends and neighbors. Previous to war, they were friends and neighbors. I'm sorry, I got tongue-tied there. Of the soldiers of Captain Smith's command, who were themselves refugees from their homes and families, having nearly a year previous broken the 1,000 ties that bound them to their homes and firesides, their wives and little ones, to battle even unto the death for the holy cause of liberty and human freedom. It was therefore with difficulty they were prevented from razing to the ground the building within whose hated walls and filthy cells their friends and relations had been confined for weeks and months, and for no reason, or no other reason than that they remained loyal to the Union, and maintained against all opposition an undying love for the glorious principles upon which the liberties of our country were founded. We remained at this place only long enough for the men to prepare some slight refreshment for themselves and to feed their animals. This was soon accomplished, and before midnight the soldiers of the Provisional Brigade were again in the saddle and again on the march. We remained at this place only long enough for the men to prepare some slight refreshment, and I just read that. Sorry. On the following day, we captured a number of wagons containing a large quantity of bacon, guns, ammunition, etc. Such of these prizes were necessary for the complete equipment of our command were issued to the men, and the balance of them were destroyed, so that they would not fall into the enemy's hands again. We also picked up during the day's march a number of animals which were indeed very much needed, as those drawn at Nashville were failing very fast from excessive fatigue and from the distemper before referred to. In fact, from 10 o'clock in the morning, our line of march was literally strewn with exhausted horses and mules, many of them dead and dying, and it was only by extraordinary labor and exertion that their places were supplied as fast as they gave out. This day, the march brought us to the base of a range of hills known as the Sand Mountains. Here it was determined to bivouac for the night. The prospect of a few hours' rest and sleep, a luxury that had not been enjoyed by any of us for some time previous, gave to our weary men a feeling of happiness that can only be realized by those who experience the utter exhaustion of excessive fatigue and long wakefulness. Up to this time, we had made slow progress in the God, I hate living in the city. The music drives me nuts. Up to this time, we had made slow progress in the direction of the grand object of the expedition, merely marching in that course with our foot soldiers, while our mounted forces was engaged day and night, scouring the country in every direction, again in search of horses and mules. And now that a sufficient number had been obtained, we were ready to push forward on the following morning with dispatch and rapidity. Rapidity, yes. Battle of Days Gap. On the morning of April 30th, 1863, the sun shone out bright and beautiful as spring days' suns ever beamed, and from the smoldering campfires of the previous night, the mild blue smoke ascended in graceful curves and mingled with the gray mist slumbering on the mountain tops above. The scene was well calculated to inspire and refresh the minds of our weary soldiers, but alas, many of the brave souls that spurred their steeds on that beautiful morning, when the command column forward was given, were never to see the dawn of another day, sadly. Scarcely was the column in motion when our rear was attacked by the enemy's advance. Sharp skirmishing continued for some time between our rear guard and one of General Roddy's regiments. It was Colonel Straight's intention to avoid, if possible, a general engagement, as the prosecution of our expedition towards the intended destination was vastly more important than a victory in this locality could possibly be to our cause. But the enemy pressing us closely and bringing up his military, throwing shot and shell into our column, a battle was the only alternative. We therefore, soon as a favorable position was obtained, halted and dismounted, and after concealing our animals in a deep ravine in our rear, formed in line of battle for the coming conflict. It was a novel and imposing sight to witness here, amid the blue and towering mountains covered with the verdure of spring, the green sward smiling a welcome to the season of the flowers, and the bright sun, unclouded, lending a genial, refreshing warmth. That little band, with shining bayonets, equipped for the stern conflict of war. The hour for action has come, and the battle of Day's Gap soon commenced. The rebel regiments can be discovered moving into line, and the stars and bars can be distinctly seen. But opposite floats proudly defiantly the old stars and stripes, the battle flag of the Union and banner of liberty. The 51st and 73rd Indiana regiments met and repulsed two desperate charges of the enemy. The 3rd Ohio and the 8th Illinois have also become engaged. The cannonading is heavy, and the rattle of musketry is sharp, especially in our left. The enemy fights well, for they are principally General Forrest's trained veterans. A loud and prolonged shout now burst on the ear. It comes from the 3rd Ohio and 8th Illinois, who have charged in and taken the enemy's battery. The enemy feel the loss of their guns and their live wavers. Cheer after cheer bursts from our brave boys, for the enemy are giving way. They are already running in the utmost disorder and confusion. Our gallant soldiers still pursue, making the ground quake and the rebels tremble. The rout is complete and the field is ours, but the victory is won by the sacrifice of some of the best and bravest blood in our heroic little brigade. Now my input there for a second. Those heroic men who fought for the freedoms of people today who think we are scum. But love them nonetheless, for Christ Jesus would want us to love them. Continuing. Those are proud moments for the soldier when he stands victorious on the bloody field and sees the columns of the enemy in full retreat before him. In this fight, the enemy received such a severe chastisement that he would not have dared to pursue us further had he not been reinforced by a large brigade of Forrest's troops. One, unfortunately for us, came to their assistance while the routed and demoralized masses were fleeing from the scene of their late inglorious defeat. The rebel loss in this engagement was about 180 officers and men killed and wounded, including Captain Forrest, a brother of the general. We also took a number of prisoners, about 30. Our own loss in killed and wounded was 31 officers and men, including the brave and lamented Lieutenant Colonel Sheets of the 51st Indiana, who fell mortally wounded while leading his regiment in a charge. Rebel barbitures. We remained on the field of our victory for some time, anticipating a second attack from the enemy, who, now that he was greatly strengthened by the addition of the fresh brigade, no doubt felt confident of making us an easy prey. He did not, however, advance during our occupation of this position. The best arrangements possible were made for our wounded, whom we were compelled to leave here in Field Hospital, leaving with them, however, one of our surgeons, Dr. Spencer of the 73rd Indiana, also such articles for their comfort and sustenance as we had at our disposal. It was with feelings of the deepest regret that we left here in a hostile country. A hostile country that was soon to fall into the hands of a merciless foe, our brave and wounded comrades. But the necessities of war are imperative. Consequently, when the command forward was given, we were compelled to bid adieu and leave here in the dark mountain ravine in which our hospital was located. The brave but unfortunate men who had fallen by our sides in the late severe conflict. The treatment experienced by these men after the enemy advanced on and made them their prisoners was inhuman beyond expression. Every ounce of the bread, meat, sugar, coffee, and etc. left for this substance was immediately taken possession of by Forrest and Roddy's unfeeling troopers. And their blankets and such articles of clothing as had been necessary, been taken off for the moment, were at once converted to the use of these semi-barbarous soldiers. In fact, as these acts of villainy occurred in presence of the rebel officers, we can but infer that it was in accordance with established rules and regulations for these villains on all occasions to exercise their thieving propensities to their complete gratification. It was no unfrequent occurrence for one of them to approach our wounded and helpless officers and men and rudely take their hats from their heads, perhaps inquire the cost of it, and receiving a proper reply, impudently remark that it was mighty cheap, and then put it on his own head and walk off. Sometimes, perhaps they would leave with their helpless and defenseless victims an old gray and slouched head covering that might once have been called a hat, and call it an even swab. But such scenes as this were common and only terminated when our men had been robbed of everything valuable that they had about them, including even pocket knives, combs, and other small, though useful articles. Even the medicines and surgical instruments left with Dr. Spencer for the benefit of the wounded were taken by the rebel surgeons and carried off. Consequently, our men had to lay with their undressed wounds and suffer the most horrible agony until death put an end to their misery, several of them dying who, with a little kind treatment and attention, would soon have recovered. The loyal citizens in the vicinity would have gladly cared for and given all the comfort and relief in their power to our wounded men, had they been permitted to, that is. But the brutal guard would not allow their suffering fellow beings to receive from this source even a cup of milk or a piece of bread. But thanks to this kind, sympathizing heart and ingenious tact of woman, the vigilance of the rebel soldiers was occasionally evaded, and our men were thankfully recipients of her kind favor, or dainty article of diet, smuggled to them and bestowed by her fair hands. Nor were those wounded men, now prisoners of war, the only victims of rebel persecution. The citizens of the surrounding country who were suspected of loyalty to the Union, were compelled to suffer the greatest indignities and most inhuman of treatments. Mrs. Penn, a widow lady, resided in the vicinity, and who had 2 sons with us in Captain Smith's company of Alabama Cavalry, seemed to be a special object of their fiendish and malignant barbarities, and she and her daughters were driven from their home, her house sacked from cellar to garret, and every article of property she possessed, including female wearing apparel, ruthlessly destroyed. Her outhouses and fences burned, and horses and mules turned in on her growing crops. The Battle of Crooked Creek. After leaving Dave's Gap, we proceeded several miles without any evidence of the enemy being in pursuit. But about 4 o'clock in the evening, our rear was again attacked, and as we did not want to lose time by halting to give battle, if it could possibly be avoided, the column was kept in motion, skirmishing, fighting going on, however, all the time between Captain Smith, 2 companies, and cavalry of the enemy's advance. Captain Smith, with his little handful of men, kept the enemy at bay for more than 2 hours, but they were now pressing us so closely that Colonel Strait resolved to halt his command and again give them battle. In a short time the bloody strife was raging with all the fury of brave and determined men. Charge after charge made by the enemy was met with and repulsed by our brave boys, who drove back with their terrible destruction each successive effort to dislodge them from the admirable position selected for our line of defense. This engagement raged with greater desperation for some time than the preceding action in the morning. The report of firearms was terrific, the flashes from the musketry and artillery lighting up the hills on all sides, rendering the scene, although of death and carnage, one of the grandest sublimity. It was now about 10 o'clock, yet by the light of the full moon, which looked calmly down on the bloody scene, we were able to discover that the enemy had began to waver and fall back, unable to contend longer against the terrible fire our men were pouring with fearful destruction into their ranks. In a short time all was quiet, and the still air of the night, that but a few moments before resounded with the roar of artillery and musketry, was only broken by the lonely notes of the whippoorwill, as they came from his secluded spot in the surrounding forest. And the provisional brigade was victorious and wounded some brave and valuable men. Among them, the number who fell in this engagement was the brave and gallant young adjutant and the 80th Illinois Lieutenant J.C. Jones. The enemy in this section had their whole force engaged, yet by the skillful maneuvering of our little brigade we met and finally repulsed them at every single point. To this and the bravery and determination of our men we alone can ascribe our success in meeting and driving back discomforted numbers, so much our superior, and having at their command several heavy field pieces. Our artillery consisted of only 2 small mountain howitzers, and the 2 pieces taken from Forrest in the morning. For the later we had but a small quantity of ammunition, the caissons being nearly empty when they were captured. They were therefore soon of no service, and were ordered by the colonel to be spiked and the carriages cut down. Capture of Dr. King. From the earliest moments of the above bloody scene, Dr. Peck, medical director, and his assistants were active in collecting and caring for our wounded. But before this arduous yet humane duty was accomplished, our command was in motion, in fact, had advanced some considerable distance, and the rebel regiment had already formed and started in pursuit. Consequently, to rejoin the brigade, Dr. Peck and King who, regardless of personal safety, still remained with our wounded, had to pass all the full length of the regiment, which they did with safety and without creating any suspicion. But after passing the head of the column, it occurred to the Rebs that they were real, live Yankees, and the foremost of the party shouted several times at the top of his voice for them to halt, and started a half-dozen comrades in pursuit of the whole party, discharging their carbines after the flying disciples of Acephalus. Fortunately, without effect. Though being well mounted, they soon overtook Dr. King, whom they made a prisoner. Dr. Peck, mounted on his favorite little roan, was by this time considerably advanced, consequently was able to escape and soon able to rejoin the command. Ambushing the enemy. Colonel Strait, anticipating an advance of Forrest's forces, soon as it was known to them that we might be moving, directed Colonel Hathaway with his regiment, 73rd Indiana, to lay concealed in heavy timber nearby for the purpose of ambushing them in the case of an immediate advance. But a few moments collapsed before the enemy's column was discovered approaching, and soon their advance battalion came up unsuspectingly with 40 yards of our concealed regiment, which at the instant poured a full volley of musketry into their ranks, sending them back pell-mell in the great consternation and disorder, with the full conviction, no doubt, that every tree for miles around concealed a Yankee soldier with a musket and a charge to the muzzle. But relying on the advantage of being in their own country, consequently acquainted with every road and bypath, also conscious of their superior numbers, they soon rallied and attacked us again about 2 o'clock in the morning when Colonel Straits again resolved to ambush them, which proved so successful and gave them such a taste of Yankee courage and skill that we had no further annoyance until about 11 o'clock the next day, when our pickets were attacked just as we were leaving Blount'sville, where we had halted to feed our animals and refresh the exhausted and fatigued men who had not had a moment's rest for 2 days and 2 nights. When we continue next week, I'll begin chapter 2 with the burning of Black Creek Bridge. It just gets more exciting and interesting as we go along, and you'll see why I named this a true American horror story as we proceed. Of course, there were hints to it already in some of the conflicts and things that I read you about in last week and now this week. I hope that, I won't say that you enjoyed this, but I do hope that you'll be able to reflect upon it, especially in light of where we're at in this nation in our time. We have a president who claims that our current situation is the most divisive to our country since the Civil War, which is absolutely absurd. But it's good to look at the reality of what happened in the Civil War and to try to understand why a president of the United States of America would try to say today what we're going through is nearly equivalent to that. Anyways, I have a tendency to ramble on, as many of you know that have been with me on my channel for quite a while. I'm going to let y'all go now. God willing, I'll be back with you next week with the beginning of chapter 2. Thank you all for stopping by. Please crush that thumbs up button. I need your help. I want my channel to grow. I've been on here since 2013, and I just hit 20,000 subscribers and having almost 7,000 videos on this channel. So I need your help. I need your help to grow and put the word out there about this channel. It's a lot of great history and family entertainment. I'm going to shut up now, or I'll probably continue on the rest of the night. God bless y'all. Love you all, and hope to see you next week.